Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda bersama saya Nina Rozman dan anda sedang menyaksikan Niaga AWANI. Seperti biasa jam ini kami akan bawakan perkembangan terkini niaga dan ekonomi dari tempatan hingga ke antarabangsa, dan saya akan mulakan dengan laporan pertama di mana Malaysia diunjurkan untuk kekal sebagai pasaran perbankan Islam terbesar di Asia Pasifik dengan 62.7% daripada jumlah aset segmen itu di rantau ini. S&P Global Ratings turut mengunjurkan Malaysia akan mengekalkan kedudukan kukuhnya dalam tempoh 2 tahun akan datang. Agensi penarafan itu berkata, pembiayaan Islam di Asia Tenggara turut diunjur berkembang sebanyak 8% dalam tempoh 2 tahun akan datang yang menyaksikan Malaysia mengekalkan kedudukan dominannya dalam pasaran. Dalam laporan mengenai sektor perbankan Islam Asia Pasifik, agensi itu berkata, bank-bank Islam dalam pasaran utama Malaysia dan Indonesia mempunyai permodalan sihat dan asas deposit runcit yang stabil. Menurut unjuran S&P Global, Asia Pasifik menyumbang 20.7% bahagian aset perbankan Islam global, manakala Asia Tenggara menguasai 80% daripada aset perbankan Islam Asia Pasifik. Bagi aspek enjin pertubuhan rantau itu, S&P Global berkata, ini termasuk cadangan penggabungan Malaysia Building Society Berhad dan Malaysian Industrial Development Finance Berhad yang mewujudkan bank dengan perkhidmatan Islam sepenuhnya di Malaysia serta meningkatkan pendigitalan perkhidmatan perbankan di rantau ini. Satu lagi pemacu pertubuhan adalah permintaan kukuh dan potensi pasaran belum diterokai yang ketara di Indonesia, Bangladesh dan Pakistan. S&P Global turut mengunjurkan bahagian pembiayaan Islam oleh bank-bank Islam Malaysia di Asia Tenggara akan meningkat kepada 45% menjelang 2026. Dari segi aliran keuntungan, agensi penarafan itu berkata, bank-bank Malaysia dijangkakan kekal mendatar pada tahun ini. Seterusnya, Lembaga Tabung Angkatan Tentera LTAT mengumumkan tawaran pengambilan alihan ke atas Boustead Holdings Berhad BHB menjadi tidak bersyarat selepas berjaya memenuhi syarat sebelum tarikh tutup pertama tawaran iaitu pada 22 Mei 2023. LTAT menerusi kenyataan pada Isnin berkata, kelulusan Bank Negara Malaysia di bawah Seksyen 87-1 Akta Perkhidmatan Kewangan 2013 FSA dan Seksyen 99-1 Akta Perkhidmatan Kewangan Islam 2013 IFSA membenarkan LTAT memperoleh sehingga 100% kepentingan ekuiti dalam BHB yang turut memberikan kesan perubahan kepada kepentingan ekuiti LTAT dalam kumpulan Afing Band Berhad.
Ujarnya, peraturan pengambil alihan, pencantuman dan pengambil alihan wajib yang dikeluarkan oleh Suruhanjaya Sekuriti Malaysia menetapkan bahawa syarat tersebut perlu dipenuhi dalam tempoh 21 hari selepas tarikh tutup pertama. Pada 17 Mei 2023, LTAT telah memenuhi syarat pegangan 90% untuk menyahsenaraikan saham BHB. Dalam masa ini, pegangan saham LTAT dalam BHB adalah sebanyak 92.5% yang dikumpulkan daripada pemerolehan melalui pasaran terbuka dan penerimaan daripada pegangan saham melalui tawaran. Tawaran ini akan dibuka untuk penerimaan sehingga 5 petang pada 12 Jun 2023. Tiada perubahan ke atas butiran lain terma dan syarat tawaran seperti yang telah dinyatakan dalam dokumen tawaran.
Golongan T20 tidak memerlukan bantuan seperti yang diterima oleh golongan B40 dan M40 kerana kumpulan pendapatan paling atas itu mampu bersaing dengan keupayaan sendiri. Penganalisis ekonomi Profesor Emeritus Datuk Dr. Zakaria Abdul Rashid berkata, golongan itu mempunyai kekuatan modal dan akan mendapat limpahan manfaat sekiranya ekonomi dapat ditingkatkan.
Soal T20 ini tak perlu kita berikan penuh tumpuan kerana dia bukannya masalah sosial, saya fikir dia lebih masalah ekonomi. Apabila kita perkasakan ekonomi dengan meningkatkan produktiviti, meningkatkan daya saing ekonomi, T20 ini dengan sendirinya akan terbantu kerana mereka ini adalah golongan-golongan yang mempunyai keupayaan modal yang besar. Mereka ni adalah golongan-golongan yang sama ada profesional ataupun semi-profesional dan mereka mempunyai kemampuan berdaya saing secara sendirian.
Sebaliknya, Zakaria menegaskan golongan yang paling memerlukan intervensi kerajaan ialah golongan B10 dan B20 yang tinggal di kawasan bandar. Oleh yang demikian, beliau sangat berharap sistem pengkalan data utama padu dapat segera dilaksanakan memandangkan ia mampu dimanfaatkan untuk mengenal pasti individu dan isi rumah yang benar-benar memerlukan bantuan. Beliau berkata demikian dalam program Agenda Awani pada Isnin.
Sejumlah 82,892 permohonan diterima bagi inisiatif pendapatan rakyat IPR sehingga Isnin dengan 33,501 daripadanya adalah individu daripada kategori berpendapatan rendah, kata Kementerian Ekonomi. Menteri Kementerian dari segi kategori seramai 16,135 individu atau 48% memohon bagi program inisiatif usahawan makanan ihsan 10,055 individu atau 30% untuk program inisiatif usahawan tani intan dan 7,311 individu bagi program inisiatif operator perkhidmatan ihsan. Kementerian telah melakukan semak silang dengan Bank Data Kemiskinan Nasional (IKASih) di bawah unit penyelarasan pelaksanaan Jabatan Perdana Menteri serta data penerima sumbangan tunai ramah di bawah Kementerian Kewangan. Tujuan semak silang ini dilaksanakan adalah bagi memastikan hanya pemohon yang mempunyai pendapatan di bawah RM5,000 sahaja layak menyertai program ini. Selain itu, Ketua Isi Rumah KIR dalam data IKASih dan IDAMAT juga akan dilibatkan dalam program IPR yang bersesuaian mengikut minat KIR. Kementerian itu menjawab soalan Datuk Seri Dr. Zulkifli Ahmad PH Kuala Selangor yang ingin tahu sejauh mana keberhasilan program IPR untuk meningkatkan ekonomi golongan B40 dalam usaha kerajaan untuk mengurangkan jurang pendapatan. Petronas Gas Berhad telah mencatatkan peningkatan 3.3% dalam keuntungan bersih kepada RM424 juta bagi suku pertama tahun kewangan 2023 daripada RM410.6 juta dalam tempoh yang sama tahun sebelumnya. Sementara itu, pendapatan kumpulan pada suku ini juga telah meningkat 15% kepada RM1.67 bilion berbanding RM1.46 juta sebelumnya, didorong oleh sektor utility selaras dengan harga produk yang lebih tinggi. Dua farma biotek Berhad telah mencatat peningkatan untung bersih sebanyak 11.5% kepada RM22.6 juta pada suku pertama tahun kewangan 2023 berbanding RM20.3 juta dalam tempoh yang sama tahun sebelumnya. Pendapatan syarikat pada suku ini juga telah meningkat 7.8% kepada RM200 juta berbanding RM186 juta sebelumnya. Lefon Berhad kembali mencatatkan keuntungan bersih sebanyak RM1.48 juta pada suku pertama berakhir 31 Mac 2023 berbanding kerugian bersih RM15.72 juta pada suku keempat berakhir 31 Disember 2022. Kumpulan itu mencatatkan peningkatan hasil sebanyak 18% atau RM15.68 juta kepada RM102.6 juta berbanding suku sebelumnya. Laporan penuh di saluran 501 dan astroawani.com serta dagangnews.com.
Tahu bagaimana konsultan Unify Business boleh membantu Cindy mengurus jualannya pada pelbagai platform?
Jom Unify Business.
Betul tu. Sekarang beliau boleh jimat masa dan kos. Serta semua diintegrasikan pada Unify E-Commerce Hub. Transformasikan perniagaan dengan Unify Business, rakan digital pilihan anda. Hubungi kami sekarang. Jom Unify Business. Sering menggaya dan menyikat menyebabkan rambut gugur. Lupakan rambut gugur. Dove Hair Boost Nourishment Baharu. Shampoo bertekstur ringan dengan micellar membersih akar rambut dan kalsium kompleks menguatkan rambut untuk 10 kali kurang rambut gugur. Dove Baharu.
Stres juga kan? Bila nak stream tengok movie atau bola kat rumah, internet tak kencang, lagging sana sini. Sebab itulah setiap rumah perlukan router Wi-Fi 6 Astro Fiber. Walaupun lebih 10 peranti bawah satu bumbung, router Wi-Fi 6 Astro Fiber ni sangat powerful. Router Wi-Fi 6 ni 3 kali lebih kencang daripada Wi-Fi 5. Tadi kita cakap pasal bola kan? Gol! Liga Malaysia sekarang dah ada dekat Astro. Ada satu bandel jimat. 50 Mbps fiber dengan Astro dan Liga Malaysia hanya RM149.99 saja sebulan. Tawaran ni terhad tau. Dapatkan sekarang sebelum direbut orang. WhatsApp nombor ni sekarang.
Mempunyai latar belakang kejuruteraan, tidak semestinya seseorang itu perlu menceburi kerjaya di sektor awam atau swasta. Sebaliknya, ada yang berani menongkah arus dengan menceburi dunia perniagaan, terutama dalam sektor yang masih kurang diceburi usahawan lain. Itulah yang dilakukan Muhammad Najmi Iqbal Cik Mun, 30 tahun, yang menjual produk makanan bayi atas nama Baby Delight Baby Food Shop di Bandar Bertam Perdana, Kepala Batas Pulau Pinang sejak setahun lalu.
Inisiatif Muhammad Najmi menceburi bidang berkenaan kerana menyedari ia mempunyai potensi untuk berkembang selain memudahkan ibu bapa mendapatkan produk makanan halal untuk bayi mereka.
Bisnes ni dapat idea daripada surrounding lah. Permulaan dia bila kita tengok kebanyakan orang kita ambil mudah lah terhadap pemakanan bayi. So dia ambil benda tu sebagai sebagai benda yang mudah, jadi dia tak ambil kisah pemakanan bayi. Jadi kat situ terdetik kat hati saya lah untuk buat kedai ni, jual barangan makanan bayi, so kita boleh jaga pemakanan bayi dengan elok lah. Jadi mudah lah untuk mana-mana parent yang nak makanan bayi, jadi kita sediakan lah untuk mereka. Kat sini kami sediakan pemakanan yang halal lah, yang tak ada kandungan gula dan garam yang berlebihan.
Antara makanan bayi dijual di Baby Delight ialah bubur ikan, bubur ayam, sup, oat dan pelbagai produk sejuk beku jenama popular antaranya Fawaz, Cik Pija, Little Nur dan Izli. Produk berkenaan sesuai untuk bayi berusia antara sebulan hingga 12 bulan, membabitkan produk yang perlu dipanaskan selain produk ready to eat. Menurut Muhammad Najmi, seperti usahawan lain, dia juga memanfaatkan media sosial untuk menarik perhatian pelanggan berikutan kedainya beroperasi di tingkat 1.
Alhamdulillah, dengan media sosial kami dapat menarik pelanggan terutama daripada luar, daripada kawasan sini, dan setakat ni Alhamdulillah berjaya, dan sale pun agak memberangsangkan lah. Setakat ni 80% lah. 80%. So selebihnya baik daripada percakapan lah. InsyaAllah untuk jangka masa yang panjang kami akan fikir untuk buat di dalam Malaysia dulu. Contohnya kita buka branch lah. Kita buat branch cawangan-cawangan lah yang ada sebelum kita buat further lagi lah, untuk lebih meluas lagi.
Mengenai perancangan masa depan, Muhammad Najmi tidak menolak kemungkinan menghasilkan produk makanan bayi jenama sendiri selain meneroka pasaran luar seperti Singapura dan Brunei.
Alright, moving on, the alternative asset space is a complex and fragmented market with many investment opportunities such as private equity, capital markets, hedge funds and commodities. And in the coming years, private capital markets are expected to experience robust growth. So to help us understand better, joining me in the studio is Willie Cheng, the Chief Operating Officer of Alta. Good morning, Willie Cheng.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so being the Southeast Asia's largest digital marketplace for alternative assets, what are the key trends you're seeing in the field, especially in Southeast Asia and perhaps in Malaysia specifically?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start really quickly by explaining what an alternative asset is. So most people, they invest their money, they put it in the bank, they buy public equities. So basically they'll go to stock markets and they'll buy and sell companies that we're familiar with. And what we're seeing is that more and more people are really demanding and trying to invest in things that are not so easily accessible. And I think as companies and economies and people mature and technology starts advancing, that demand becomes stronger and stronger. So we really want to become the platform to allow people to invest in those types of companies, assets and opportunities. Specifically in Malaysia, we work with many high growth companies and we actually support them in raising money and really helping develop, whether it's the latest agri-tech product, whether it's the latest med-tech product, right? And these are all companies that we work with very closely, that we want to support and help build the Malaysia ecosystem as well.
How about the markets or trends in the Southeast Asia?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is that the overall allocation, so the percentage of money that both individuals and institutional investors are putting into alternative assets is increasing. So in Singapore, Temasek actually in 2022, it was the first time ever that over 50% of the allocation of their investments were actually into private market products.
Okay, how does these trends that you mentioned just now create opportunities as well as give impact to the Malaysian market specifically? And also, what are the factors that drive the growth of the alternative assets?
Yeah, so what happens is that a lot of companies, and we see this in Malaysia as well, it's very hard for them to access capital, to access money to grow their businesses. And normally what people will do is they'll go to the bank and try to get a loan, or if they're big enough, maybe they can go and IPO on Bursa, right? But what we do is we're able to target some of these smaller companies. They may be a little bit earlier in their growth cycle, and we can actually go and help them fundraise. And we're actually able to tap our Alta community, just in Malaysia alone, is over 20,000 different investors to help fund different projects.
So if there's investors out there that wish to invest in alternative assets, what are the factors that they should look at or consider into before investing? And also, what are the pros and cons doing investment for alternative assets, and as well as the regulatory requirements needed?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, in terms of the different considerations, I think what we're trying to do is to try to make it just like any other investment product. So if I'm going to be investing in a stock, let's say, I should be thinking about, oh, how good is this company? How do you think this company is going to be performing in the overall economy long term? But that really should be all I'm thinking about. So some of the things that you see in alternative asset investments today that are really troublesome, technology risk. What if I go to a platform and there's a problem, right, and the site crashes or it goes away? Sometimes there's regulatory risk, right? Oh, the laws are not really clear and I don't know how protected I am. And sometimes there's counterparty risk too. So if I'm buying something, how do I know that the seller is selling me something that's genuine, that they're not going to run away? Or the other way around, if I'm selling something, how do I know the buyer is really good for the money, right? So what we do as a marketplace is we get rid of those three risks: the regulatory risk, the technology risk, the counterparty risk, so that you can be very comfortable. You're dealing with a regulated market, we're licensed as well, and all you really need to think about is what are the merits of this particular investment product. So that's been a real problem with the alternative asset space, and it is still something that we see quite a lot, is that, hey, I really have to worry about all these other things that I don't have to worry about if I was going to buy or sell a stock on Bursa.
That's about the pros and cons. But what about the technicality? Can you explain the technicality when you wish to invest in alternative assets, and also what are the metrics used to determine the value?
Yeah, so it is actually very much like a, like a public market. So we do have a website, and we're about to launch an app as well. So it's really as simple as you log in. You can actually see all the different investment opportunities on our platform. So that can be on your PC, on your laptop, or on your mobile device as well. And yeah, it's really just as simple as you can see the last traded price of whatever it is. In Malaysia, we do a lot of crowdfunding campaigns as well. So the price is actually basically there for the different companies or projects that we're working on. Click a few buttons and basically your investment is completed.
How about the common investment structures for these alternative assets?
Yeah, so it really depends. And alternative assets, it's meant to be very, very broad. So in our headquarter market in Singapore, basically any financial security we're actually able to deal in and put onto our platform for people to invest in. So when I say any financial product, it can be an equity of a private company, it can be a fixed income like a bond product, it can be a real estate, it could be a fund, and it can actually even be like a luxury asset as well. In Malaysia, we're a little bit more specialized. So the main products of focus here are equity products. We have managed some and placed out some micro funds. And we've actually also created some very interesting securities where we can actually arrange it so that there's a revenue share. And for people who invest, they actually get a share of the revenue that the company generates and earns as well.
Okay, can you share what are the types of alternative asset and which one is best suited for market volatility that we're facing right now?
Yeah, so the different types, I think, as I mentioned, right? So it's all the different financial instruments that I think we know, but there tend to be the ones that are much more difficult to access, right? So equities of private companies. So these might be companies that are a little bit smaller. They're not quite ready to go IPO, or they can even be really big companies, like let's say SpaceX, right? Which is associated with Elon Musk. People are very excited about, Discord. Stripe is a payment company. So all of these different equities are not listed on any market. So these are companies that we are actually able to source some inventory and make available to investors. Besides equities, they can be certain bond products, they can be real estate assets, and we've even got some very exciting assets on some of our marketplaces, like let's say art. People like to invest in art, but it's very hard, right? Sometimes you invest in a big painting, first of all, to have enough money to buy it. And secondly, once you've decided you're ready to sell, right, where do you sell it and what marketplace do you use? So we want to make it as simple as possible. So one, you don't have to put in a huge amount of money. You can actually buy a fraction of a piece. Yes. And then two, we want to be the marketplace, right, where you can actually sell it as easily as possible. You also asked about kind of like which assets are better to invest in when, you know, certain phases of the economy. That's actually really hard to answer. And I think it's really up, and we want to make it empower the investor to make their own decisions. And a lot of times the investors are able to work with their financial advisors. And yeah, I think you see certain patterns if it's a high interest rate environment, if the job market is weak, or if economy A or economy B is doing well, right? Certain sectors are better. Our mission is to just try to make the marketplace as big and as powerful as possible so that investors have the choice to decide and allocate as they see fit.
All right, we want allow me to dive more into your business, Altas. Can you share more information about Altas' entry itself into Malaysian market and how's the response like so far?
Yeah, so we've been here for several years. I think since 2016 or 17. We actually operate under the RMO scheme, Recognized Market Operator, which is a license that's granted to us from the Securities Commission. So we've actually sponsored and led several different deals with our client companies. And most of these are high growth companies, everything from new technologies to agricultural. So one of the companies that I was just working with very recently is Musang Valley. So the leader in the durian space. And they actually have a very, technologically advanced and IoT powered plantation in Central Peninsula. So yeah, it was actually very exciting. But I guess it hopefully gives you just a sense of all the different types of companies that we can sponsor and work with as well. So
diversity, right?
Yes.
Okay, what about the awareness? What's your plans for outreach and also awareness bidding, especially in Malaysia?
Yeah, I think awareness, even things like this, right? Just trying to get our name out, right? I think that within the RMO and the crowdfunding space, we're already a pretty well-known and established brand. One of the things that really sets us apart is our Southeast Asia presence. So not only do we consider ourselves a market leader here in Malaysia, but we're also a market leader in Singapore and Indonesia and several of the other markets that we're in. The other thing that really helps us to build awareness is just to continue to increase the different number and pipeline of deals that we're working with. And again, normally what a lot of other crowdfunding platforms will do is they'll help certain companies raise money. But what we want to do is, in addition to just helping companies raise money, to really be their partner and help them along in their journey as they grow. So after we help our companies raise money, we can actually also provide other value-added services, everything from marketing, investor relations. And again, because of our regional and global presence, we can actually build awareness for our partner companies outside of Malaysia as well.
Okay, probably moving forward, what are your short-term and also long-term goals for Alta especially, and also the alternative assets in general?
Yeah, so I think what we really are trying to do is to integrate our overall Alta platform across all of our different offices. So in our headquarters market in Singapore, we have a very active exchange, and it's actually connected to over 1 million different investors all throughout the world. And what we're trying to do, and we are working very closely with different regulators and partners here, is to try to bring a lot of the different deals and the partner companies that we work with here in Malaysia onto our global platform in Singapore to, again, build awareness of these companies and actually allow investors from all sorts of different countries to actually invest in the story of Musang Valley or Interlight or a lot of the other companies that we're working with here in Malaysia.
All right, to all potential investors out there,
yes,
if they wish to invest in AA, how do they reach Alta?
Oh, it's actually very simple. So you can actually just come to our website. I believe it's alta.com.my and sign up. And it's a very, very straightforward and seamless process. And again, we do have a lot of very exciting deals that are on offer.
All right, that is Willie Cheng, the Chief Operating Officer of LTAT. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us on Niaga AWANI this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Baik, sepanjang minggu ni untuk kita lihat bagaimanakah iaitu data-data yang telah dikeluarkan oleh agensi jabatan, dan kali ini untuk kita lihat bagaimanakah data ringgit, iaitu kita melihat prestasi ringgit sejak pandemik dan selepas pasca pandemik COVID-19 kita telah lihat ia naik turun, dan apakah kesan prestasi ringgit ini terhadap ekonomi negara kita. Sudah tentu saya akan kongsikan antara data daripada website Trading Economies di mana ia telah menunjukkan bagaimanakah prestasi ringgit yang kita dapat saksikan, iaitu ringgit kita dapat perbandingan antara US dollar. Ini saya akan tunjukkan bagaimanakah prestasi ringgit dalam masa setahun daripada Mei tahun ini hinggalah Mei tahun lepas. Dan kalau anda teliti daripada graf ini menunjukkan pergerakan setahun iaitu prestasi ringgit kita. Kalau kita nak mulakan daripada Mei tahun lepas, ini adalah antara paras kita ringgit kita, di mana ini adalah antara angka di paras 4.39. Ini adalah Mei tahun lepas. Namun selepas Mei tahun lepas, kita lihat selepas iaitu suku kedua, kita dapat lihat prestasi ringgit semakin melemah, di mana anda melihat graf ini semakin menaik sehinggalah ia mencecah prestasi iaitu ringgit paling lemah iaitu pada tahun lepas yang telah mencatatkan iaitu di paras 4.73. Ya, selepas saja ringgit telah mencapai paras yang terburuk pada tahun lepas lebih kurang pada bulan November, dan selepas itu ia telah menurun. Anda melihat trend menurun di mana iaitu value ringgit kita iaitu meningkat apabila anda melihat graf ini turun, dan kita melihat trend ini menurun sehinggalah pada tahun 2023 sehinggalah ia mencapai tahap terbaik prestasi ringgit. Anda melihat poin ini, dia telah mencapai sebanyak 4 di antara paras 4.3. Namun selepas kita telah mencapai tahap terbaik prestasi ringgit ini pada awal tahun ini, anda melihat iaitu trend menurun di mana ringgit semakin melemah. Anda melihat trend ini menaik, dan apabila ia menaik, anda melihat iaitu prestasi daripada bulan Mac ia kekal trend menaik. Ini menunjukkan prestasi ringgit iaitu value ringgit itu semakin rendah. Sudah tentu ringgit ini mempunyai banyak impak kesannya kepada kepada pelbagai aspek ekonomi negara kita, perniagaan kita. Namun kita nak lihat paling utama sekali, paling penting sekali, bagaimanakah prestasi ringgit ini memberi impak dan memberi kesan terhadap inflasi kita. Jangan ke mana-mana, teruskan bersama kami. Niaga AWANI akan bersama rakan tugas Ibrahim Sani selepas ini. BP Healthcare Group yang diasaskan oleh Datuk Bae Chun Chuan berkata, kumpulan itu telah menyatakan minatnya terhadap Pharma Niaga Berhad. Chun Chuan dalam temu bual bersama The Edge berkata, BP Healthcare menyatakan minat mereka ketika ditanya sama ada syarikat itu telah mengemukakan cadangan dalam usaha untuk mengubah Pharma Niaga. Pameran Maritim dan Aeroangkasa Antarabangsa Langkawi 2023 yang akan berlangsung hari ini hingga 27 Mei ini dijangka mampu mencapai janji niaga sehingga 18 bilion ringgit. UOA Development Berhad mencatatkan untung bersih sebanyak 46.1 juta ringgit bagi suku pertama berakhir 31 Mac 2023 berbanding 25.4 juta ringgit bagi suku sama pada tahun sebelumnya. Laporan penuh di saluran 501 dan astroawani.com serta dagannews.com.
Ingin tahu bagaimana konsultan Unify Business boleh membantu Cindy mengurus jualannya pada pelbagai platform?
Jom Unify Business.
Betul tu! Sekarang belia boleh jimat masa dan kos. Serta semua diintegrasikan pada Unify E-Commerce Hub. Transformasikan perniagaan dengan Unify Business, rakan digital pilihan anda. Hubungi kami sekarang. Jom Unify Business.
Hearing kes awak lagi 2 hari tau, Lia.
Menuntut hak di muka pengadilan.
Tak sabar rasanya.
Anak-anak apa yang nakal sangat pergi glue kat atas sampul ni?
Duduk keluar.
Ini sakit.
Lakon kau tak ada.
Mama!
Inikah takdir yang tertulis?
Ya Allah, cucu aku tak boleh dibayar dengan wang ringgit.
Andai itu takdirnya di Astro dan Astro Go.
Bahaya semakin terasa. Kehangatannya kian menjulang. Segalanya menuju ke kemuncaknya. Mampukah anda bertahan? apabila lawan mencetuskan pertempuran. Tiada jalan berpatah balik demi memburu sebuah kejuaraan. Kejohanan Malaysia Masters 2023 secara langsung di Astro Super Sport 4 dan aplikasi Astro Go.
Apa kesannya jika cadangan ini diterima pakai oleh pihak kerajaan?
60 tahun tu masih lagi relevan dan masih lagi relevan.
Ada isu-isu yang perlu dibincangkan.
Memang disengajakan dengan alasan-alasan yang tidak munasabah.
Satu perencanaan usaha ada dalam kerangka mereka itu ya.
Bagaimana kita melihat dalam konteks undang-undang?
Lembaga pengampunan sentiasa wujud.
Agenda Awani setiap hari di Astro Awani dan Astro Go.
Thanks for continuing on with us. I'm taking over from Nina Rozman, and we continue our coverage on the movement of the ringgit. As of this morning, the ringgit is at 4.55 against $1. This comes on the back of some of the remarks made by the Prime Minister, also the Minister of Finance yesterday in the Parliament, saying that Malaysia's economy is well under control, inflation is under control, and that growth is expected to be quite robust for this year. Here to unpack this and more is Han Liu of Ringgit Plus joining us. Han, what do you make of these movements right now, particularly on the severe weakening of the ringgit over the past few weeks?
Morning, Ibrahim. Morning, everyone. Yeah, I think, just a bit of context, the ringgit, had a huge strengthening run from kind of last November to January. We went all the way down to 425 to US dollar at the end of January, and has since deteriorated over the last 3-4 months by about 8% to 4.55, as you mentioned. I think the story is not so much domestically. Domestically, the numbers, I don't want to say look good, but I say they look much more improved from previous years. Like, inflation was super high last year. This year it's moderated, and it's going to be further moderated by end of the year to under 3%. So it's getting close to the 2% target. Economic growth is not blockbuster like last year's recovery year, but still moderating, right, to that 5%, which is what we were doing pre-COVID. So I think it's not a case, I guess, of too much domestic issues that are causing pressure to the ringgit right now, but more so about what's happening with the global economy, right? Namely, what's happening with oil, what's happening with the US dollar and rates, and what's happening with China and the US in terms of their demand and how we're exporting to them. So I think there's a huge confluence of factors, not necessarily heavily domestic.
And of course, because of these factors outside our control, what would be some of the outlook when it comes to the ringgit movement? Do you feel that the ringgit will continue to weaken even further, considering that these external factors are not going to abate anytime soon?
Yeah, I think as a licensed financial planner, advisor, and I look after a lot of people's investments now, I tell people to look at a couple of key things other than the domestic front for Malaysia, right? What do I need to look at to kind of get a sense of where the ringgit is heading or where we're heading, right? And the number one thing I guess to look is the price of oil, right? Brent specifically, it's down from this time last year. It's in $120 a barrel. Now it's 75. Malaysia is a huge, beneficiary of higher oil prices in terms of our export of those items. So, now that, oil is down, 35% year on year, that's going to impact us, the amount of oil that we export as a country. We're a heavily exporting country for that. And, I don't need to go too much about Petronas. So that's one thing to look out for. It's now down at 75 barrel. That's way down from last year. So any further weakening in global demand impacting the price of oil will definitely have second order effects on the ringgit. Second thing I tell investors to look at is how is the health of the global economy when it comes to our exports, right? So how do you look at that using Malaysia's exports as a barometer? And you can see like the April numbers came out last week. Exports are down to China 20% down versus last year. Exports to the US also about 20% down. So you can see, hey, we had a great export year last year. It's starting to look like it's, I don't want to say running out of steam, but starting to slow down. And as you know, the export, the less we're able to defend our currency with exported money, right? Sorry, exported goods getting things like US dollars, yen, and euros into the country, right, to defend the ringgit. So I think that's kind of a few things to look at, right, in terms of forecasting or looking at in terms of the ringgit.
Okay, I have to ask this question, though I don't believe it myself. Political risk is something that we need to debate on, at least in the next few minutes. If I can just insert this particular graphic that my colleague has just presented a few minutes ago, Nina. We can just end this graphic right now. Yep, there you go. Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim assumed the Prime Ministerial office on 24th of November. And as you can see, from 23rd November onwards, the ringgit strengthened quite considerably to a point of, say, 4.2, 4.25, something like that. And then, of course, it's weakening again. Does the weakening or the strengthening of the ringgit have anything to do with a mandate on how this administration is running its affairs? Is this a referendum of sorts in terms of Anwar Ibrahim's capability in leading this government?
I don't have a specific political viewpoint, but what I can share is that markets and investors hate uncertainty, and you can see, about a year ago, growing uncertainty about the political stability of our country impacting the ringgit, alongside obviously all the factors from last year around the US dollars tightening cycle, right? Heading up to November. During November, there was a one-time, elimination of, as it were, of the uncertainty around what's happening with Malaysia politically. We had an election. We had an unclear result from a political standpoint, but from a fiscal governmental standpoint, it was fairly clear, right? There was a government to be formed. Rather than no government, that would have been disastrous. And that gave investors confidence that, hey, there is a government, it's going to, election was held, there is a government, so, let's get back to business, essentially. And now I think that there's a bit of challenge for, the government we have today. It's not so much around a referendum, the ringgit being a referendum, right? We have headwinds globally, right? And the performance of ringgit is largely, I would say, 2/3 to 80% driven by those global factors. The remaining, yes, I think, the Prime Minister and the government have a lot on their hands to deal with to, I don't say defend the ringgit, but to ensure that, we keep the market confident in our country, right? We keep the market confident in the political stability of our country without kind of delaying the state elections too much, without worrying too much kind of stuff. I just get it done, right, and continue governing, continue sound policies, which can allow us to respond somewhat to those global factors, right? Without that, that's going to cause further pressure on the ringgit.
Let's talk a little bit more about the global factors then, because the markets currently are awaiting the minutes of the latest FOMC meeting that is due tomorrow. Markets are pricing in a 68.68% chance of rates being held steady next month, and another 31.4% chance that a 25 basis point hike is going to take place. This is, of course, a CME Fed Watch tool has shown. Because of this, do you feel that the upcoming US Federal Reserve interest rate is going to impact further the movement of the ringgit and to a large extent, the way domestic investments, investments are going to be attracted for domestic purposes right now?
A good question. I think, all eyes on that, right? In terms of what's the posturing, right? Whether they are going to further raise, whether they're going to stop here. And even if they do stop here, one thing that investors need to note is how long do they stop for? Because rates are at a kind of 15-year high. In financial crisis, in the 2008 financial crisis, right? They're, well over 5% now in terms of the Fed funds rate. And you look at that kind of it going the next month or so. I think the more important thing also to look at is not so much the FOMC, but, politically, are the US going to solve this debt ceiling issue? If they don't, that's going to be a big amount of volatility in the market, a lot of risk off the table. And, risk off the table means emerging markets suffer because we're seen as higher risk, higher return countries. So risk off means, we're going to suffer in terms of foreign fund outflows because there's going to be a flight to safety somewhere. It may not be.
Yeah, sorry, we kind of lost you a bit in patches there. Let's look at the role of domestic investors here in Malaysia. ETFs seem to be hot right now when it comes to trying to find investment, when it comes to investing or growing your investment. We're looking at, because of the US dollar being so high against the ringgit, now would be a good time to start looking at investments internationally, at least for retail investors, folks like me, like you. Do you think that this kind of thinking is the right way of thinking, or is there more nuance to this kind of line of argument right now?
A great line of argument, I think. I mean, all investors should look to diversify. And most people, when I say diversify, they think, okay, buy more than one stock or buy stocks plus bonds. But when I say diversify, I also mean across countries and currencies, right? If you don't do that, you're leaving yourself at risk to a specific country. Now, we live in Malaysia, so it's probably more than okay. We have a lot of allocation to Malaysia, but diversification means you got to look elsewhere. Global stocks, US stocks, global bonds, US bonds, international bonds, right? Just to diversify your own portfolio, and not necessarily as a trigger because, where the ringgit's specifically going. It's more around making sure you have more exposure. So the nuance is, yes, you should be looking overseas for a part of a portfolio, but probably not do it only as a result of seeing where the ringgit is going, whether it's up or down. I think it should just be always a part of your portfolio anyway, and don't worry too much about it in the investment perspective.
Very recently, yesterday, the Prime Minister made a few announcements in the Parliament, including that on the 1MDB solution, for instance. He's talking about how Malaysia is going to discuss findings with the 1MDB solutions with Abu Dhabi. He also mentioned that there would be no more subsidies for T20, including that of no electricity tariff hike except for T20 households. So, we're looking at the government actively trying to see how they can manage
the market view or the global market view on Malaysia. We're coming to the tail end of it. What I mean by that is, a large majority of the 1MDB debt has been, repaid or settled, and with a little bit to go. The big payment was kind of early this year, and we have probably about 9 or 10 billion left, versus kind of like a $40-50 billion hole, right? And that should allow us a little bit more fiscal space. It has been very fiscally constraining the last kind of 3 years or so in terms of having to repay that debt and considering it as development expenses without actually having any development done because it was all for past transgressions, right? But going forward, that going away, or that being in the rear view mirror, should give a little bit more fiscal space to the government, and it shows in the budget, right? They're having to spend less on 1MDB repayments in the coming year, and they're forecasting a lot less in 2024 as well. So that should help, right? In terms of confidence in our fiscal position, all right. And when it comes to subsidies, it's huge. It's every year the size of 1MDB the last 3 years, right? Like 50-60 billion. I think in budget 2023 it was at 57 billion, and the government is looking to, I would say, do the low-hanging fruit first, right? So first the corporate electricity subsidies, then they're going to go with diesel, then the big one, which is RON 95, right? I think that's gonna be a bit shocking, I would say, to the Malaysians as a whole, but we need to do something, and it's better than doing nothing, right? To kind of really enhance or fix our fiscal position even further, and be a more responsible nation. I think personally the easiest way would be to kind of take the band-aid off and then provide some aid directly to those who need it most. But that's just my opinion. I think it remains to be seen what the government actually does, what mechanism they actually have to remove those subsidies.
Yeah. That's the idea right now. I mean, your view is precisely that. Your view. In fact, one would argue that the current consensus right now is that there exists some form of political stability in Malaysia vis-a-vis the past few years. Also, economic policies, for better or worse, are clear. And because of the political stability and economic policies that are clear, this has made the argument that investment growth for the first quarter have led to encouraging levels. And the Prime Minister has indeed said as much. Yes, in Parliament, he said that approved investments for the first quarter of this year totaled 71.4 billion ringgit. This is a 60% increase from the 44 billion ringgit recorded in the first quarter of last year. The Prime Minister also cited that AWS plans to invest 25 billion ringgit, 25.5 actually, as well as investments from Tesla, for instance, in EV, China-based Rongshan Petrochemicals Limited in petrochemical products, and Geely and Proton trying to grow their business in Tanjung Malim, in their automotive city. So because of all this, the Prime Minister also said that the economic policies before were confusing, but Malaysia's economic growth would not have outpaced those of, say, Indonesia, Vietnam, and China, the markets that we always talk about that tends to outdo Malaysia. Malaysia's economy grew by 5.6% for the first quarter of this year. The better than performance such as countries like Indonesia, China and Vietnam is indeed quite promising for the first quarter, but if you look at the longer term, maybe the past 10 quarters, Malaysia still is lacking behind. This growth is also stronger than Bank Negara's forecast between 4.0 to 5.0 for this year. So because of this, do you feel that there's some encouraging signs for Malaysia when it comes to growing the economy for this year? And then of course the tack-on question is it are you fearful or are you a little bit more pessimistic because